Good evening, everybody. So I'm taking a stroll after a day of teaching. I think it's like the 5th or 6th weekend of the Art of Circling practitioner training, which is essentially a year-long training in the art of circling, informally learning how to facilitate it, which is quite the deep thing. Basically, circling is essentially enacting. If you think about what circling is like enacting the very way personhood births itself, basically, and enacting the enactment of which is how we were transformed from essentially helpless little amoebas into persons. In other words, enacting relationality in the deepest sense of the word. So you can probably imagine, to become someone who can facilitate this. It's quite deep. It's quite the radical thing to do. And challenging in so many regards, right? And I'm so fine through the years, man. I was just really present to that today, of just with the students, like what the student goes through, right, and learning is so encouraging, right? It's like, in some sense, being able to witness who one becomes in learning to circle, right? In probably learning itself, right? Just reveals an extraordinariness about those students, right? Man. It's who they become through it and who is expressed through it. So amazing. I just feel so grateful that I have found myself having a life doing this all day. It's just amazing. And what I'm present to today is really, man, how different. I think what I now understand, or am coming to understand, of what exactly teaching and learning is. From when I first started to teach, which is, I don't know, probably over 25 years ago at this point. And I think back then, without really even consciously thinking about it, I think I just understood teaching to be something like, teaching was the activity that caused learning. Excuse me. And so, and that activity of teaching was arose out of the will of the teacher. It was more like, one teaches, and if one does it well, the students end up with the result of learning. It's more like dissemination of information or something, right? It's like more, teaching I think was more, I had the sense of it, of being more about a performance. You perform an action, right? To create a result. And I have to say, That's, that is not even close to what I've come to understand teaching and learning to be now. These things are very mysterious, right? Learning to be deeply educated, right? Really involves it really involves one's whole being, I think, right? And teaching is, in some sense, so much more, and at the same time, so much less than what I thought it was, right? Being a teacher. Because I've come to understand, or I think I'm coming to understand, that learning isn't the product of some activity. It's not produced. It's not the object produced through, like, the performance of the teacher, right? Or even the performance of the learner, the student. But rather, it seems to me that to teach is a kind of a Gelassenheit, right? The Gelassenheit is the German, essentially the German name for what Meister Eckhart, the Christian philosopher, I think 1200s, you can roughly translate to letting be. I think teaching is not a performance of an activity, but rather it's a kind of Gelassenheit. It's a teacher teaches by letting learn. To let learn. And so in this sense, learning is in some sense a presence. There is the presence of learning. So to teach really is to become attuned to and to become sensitive, deeply sensitive, to be struck by the awareness and the perception and the attunement of learning itself. So learning in that sense is more the job of the teacher, is really a job in which they let learn. In other words, they respond to the presence of learning. And in some sense, let it come into being. Cultivate it, reveal it, let it arise. Because I think learning is something that we all, student and teacher, in this letting learn, is to dwell in the presence of learning. So in that sense, man, teaching is much more difficult than anything you can perform. It's more a sense of a deep kind of listening. A listening to learning itself. And in that listening, find oneself abiding by it, dwelling in it, being struck by it. And in some sense, getting out of the way. And listening and watching this dwelling, which we all find ourselves dwelling within it and being indwelled by it. In which we, in some sense, become its place, its residence, its site. Which, what becomes enacted is a kind of courage that is so strikingly beautiful. Perhaps it's the courage of the way one becomes a person. One learns personhood in the most radical and original sense of the word.